Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Christine Biglin from St. Mary's County Library, and here tonight we are joined by Barb Whipkey, who is the owner of Wild Birds Unlimited stores in Lexington Park and LaPlata, and we're going to be talking about bird feeding 101, getting our basics straight so that we can have successful bird feeding stations. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Barb.
All right, so we are going to talk today about backyard bird feeding. Whether you've been feeding the birds for a while or you're new to bird feeding, I hope you're going to get something out of this. And whatever questions you may have, even if it's not something new to bird feeding, maybe a new problem you're having or an ongoing problem that you're having, definitely put those questions in there and we'll try to get to those. So, why feed the birds? These are just some of the topics we're going to talk about today. Why feed the birds? Locations. What are some good locations for feeding the birds? Some different feeder options. What kind of foods to offer? Problem solving. I suspect everybody's having some problems right now with feeding the birds. Maybe some blackbirds that are bombarding your feeders. So those are definitely some options, problems we can cover tonight. And then creating a bird feeding habitat. So let's just hop right into those. So first of all, why feed the birds? One of the obvious is to bring them in for entertainment. There's nothing better than looking out and seeing those birds coming to your feeders. So that is going to go along with location. So when you're choosing that location, you want to make sure to try to choose a location where you're going to be able to see those birds. It is helpful to the birds as well during times like this with this drought that we've been having. I know it's hard to believe after yesterday and today that there is a drought, but we have been in a severe drought, which means that a lot of the natural food sources have dried up. So that's why you're seeing such a crazy number of birds at your feeders. Along with that, those birds are trying to feed their young right now. So you'll hear a lot of people say, oh, I don't feed the birds in the spring and summer. There's a lot of natural foods out there. Spring and summer is when the birds actually need your help more than ever, because although things are starting to bloom and grow, those things have not gone to seed yet. So if you're ever going to take a break from feeding the birds, the better time to do that would be late summer when you see things starting to go to seed. If you've been feeding for a while, you've probably noticed that come September, October, your feeder activity gets a little bit slower. And that's because that's when things are going to seed, and birds know that nature is best. So, along with that, you can rest assured that those birds are not going to become dependent on your feeders. They appreciate that help that you're giving them, but they're taking that seed and suet, things you're providing at your feeders, as just a little bit extra. They will always go to nature first and use your feeders as just a little bit extra to help them along the way. So location, location, location. You first bring that bird feeder home or that pole station home, and you're trying to think, where do I want to put this? Think about, where do you spend the most time? Where is that spot where you tend to sit and drink your coffee or sit and watch TV, sit and read a book? Where's that window nearby? Because out that window is where you want to set that pole station up. You want to put it where you're going to be able to see it and enjoy those birds. Obviously, so that you can enjoy the birds, but you also want to be able to keep an eye on those feeders. You need to be able to see when they're getting low and it's time to refill them. You need to see when it's time to clean those feeders. If that hummingbird feeder is starting to get, the water starting to get cloudy, it's your responsibility to change the nectar and clean it. So location is major important. So before you set up that feeder, figure out a good location where you're most going to enjoy it, but also where you're going to be able to take good care of your birds. And then next is choosing a feeder. Four things to look at. Is that feeder easy to fill? Because if that feeder's hard to fill, it's going to spend a lot of time sitting empty. If it becomes a chore, you're not going to want to fill it. Is it easy to clean? If it's not easy to clean, you're not going to clean it as often as you should. I will add a little note in there. We do offer a feeder cleaning service in our stores. For $10, you can bring your feeders in and we will clean them for you. Sometimes that $10 is well worth the money spent. Is that feeder sturdy? If that feeder is very cheaply made plastic, it's probably not going to hold up very long. So although you may only be spending $20 for that feeder, if it only lasts you a couple weeks, you may want to think through the price of the purchase versus the longevity. And a major important one is it's safe. Look for spots. We don't sell wooden feeders in our store. We have the only type we do have is a little wooden log that will last you about a year or so because after that, it's going to become moldy. Here in Southern Maryland, it is so humid that those wooden feeders get moldy really fast and you just cannot clean those. So I discourage wooden feeders. Wooden houses are great, but those that you're putting food in, wooden is not a very safe option with our high levels of humidity here. So look for things that are going to be easy to clean, no sharp edges. If you got a plastic one and it breaks, you need to get rid of it if you've got sharp edges on there, screws that are sticking out. So just really stand in the store and look over those feeders and make sure they're safe, kind of like you would have done with the toys for the children. Take a good look. Just because they're selling them in the store does not mean they're safe. They don't have the same standards for animals that they have for children. So take a good look at those feeders when you're shopping. And then, what are the different options that we have for feeders? So first one is hopper feeders. So I'm going to grab one up here. That is a picture of a hopper feeder you see there. And that, by the way, is two summer tanagers that you see there. That's a first year male. He will, by the following year, that the guy on the top there, hang on, let me get my mouse. He's going to eventually become all red like this. See that little almond color beak on there? This is the female here. Same thing, she's going to become totally yellow. I'm pointing that out because they are being seen a lot right now. They will come to your feeders if you have the right foods in there. They are not a seed eater. That pointed beak tells us they're more of a suet eater. I'm sorry, an insect eater. And birds who eat insects will eat suet. So for these ones, you want to get suet cakes out. If you notice that suet cake hanging on the side, that bird cannot cling to the side of that cage to eat suet. The reason they were up there is they were able to get up here, perch on this little ledge, and then eat the suet from there. So that's why they were actually coming to that feeder. So if you have a tray feeder and you put some type of suet or suet product, hold on one second, I'm losing my voice here already. Something like this is what we call our bark butter nuggets. You can find other suet nuggets, things like that. And then you put those in a tray feeder, which I'll cover tray feeders in a second. It would be a flat feeder so that they could then come and perch and eat from it. Those birds will come to your feeder. So those aren't a common feeder bird, but they will come with the right foods and the right feeders. So hopper feeders is what you think of the old style feeder that looks like a house. They're the ones that are going to open up, you fill them. Great thing about hopper feeders is all birds can eat from a hopper feeder. Okay, next up is going to be a tube feeder. So this is going to be a long style feeder. Birds can perch on this one. So the problem with a tube feeder is birds like our cardinals, doves, ones who have a short, thick neck are not able to land on a perch and turn sideways. So what we do here is add a tray to the bottom. And then when we add that tray to it, that lets those cardinals and doves land on the tray and eat from here. So if you're using a tube feeder and you want to bring in those birds, you would want to add a tray to the bottom. And then we always recommend adding weather guards to the top. So a weather guard just drops on the top. That's going to protect the seed, keep your seed drier, but you'll also find when it's raining, when it's snowing, the birds will continue to come to the feeders. I mentioned a tray feeder, so this is what a tray feeder would look like. And if you put something like those bark butter nuggets in there, that's going to allow those birds, like those summer tanagers, to come in there and eat. And in a tray feeder, you can put basically any kind of foods. You can even open up a suet cake, something like that. You can open it up and lay it right in the center of a tray and then sprinkle seed around the side of it. The great thing about a tray feeder is it can become a smorgasbord. You can just put everything in there. Everybody can eat from a tray feeder, and you can get them in multiple sizes. They come smaller than this and they come larger than this. So tray feeders are awesome. The bad thing about a tray feeder is they're exposed to the elements. So you're going to be filling them every couple days. This rain we've had the last couple days, even with a weather guard on them, that was some crazy rain, some crazy wind. So you're going to be cleaning out those tray feeders a lot more often. So just keep that in mind. It's a good addition to have, but it's when you're going to fill more often and clean more often. But I definitely have several tray feeders at my house, and I love the activity that I get in them. Okay, next up is a cylinder feeder. And this one's probably a little bit different looking to you if you've never seen one before. Very crazy. So the top I just took off, and then you get these cylinders, which is a preformed log of seed, has a hole in the middle, and you would just drop it on here. And then you hang it up and you basically hang it out there. One of the great things is the birds stay around longer. They have to work a little bit harder to get their seed. And of course, you would put the top back on afterwards. And so you have that hanging out there. This is a great way to feed. Lasts longer, is easier. You don't have loose seed that you're filling up. That particular one was nesting blend, formulated specifically for the birds who are nesting right now. So, but those are a great way to feed. We also have those in a hot pepper formula. So if your pole system is not squirrel proofed, it's a way to keep those squirrels from munching on that. And next up is finch feeders. So this one is designed specifically to feed our finches. So that would be our goldfinches, the cute little yellow, bright yellow ones right now. They are just very bright. And then also house finches. It has very small holes, and you would put Niger or Finch blend in this. This one is great because it keeps the larger birds off. So if you're having problems right now with blackbirds, it's great to have a finch feeder up because those blackbirds cannot get to this one. So having a finch feeder up is perfect right now. And of course, that weather guard I talked about is another good one. And then a suet feeder. So a lot of you may be familiar with suet. Your grandparents, great grandparents have been feeding suet forever, but a lot of you may just be familiar with it being a winter product when actually suet is being eaten at our feeders much quicker right now than in the winter months because the birds use it to feed their young. So the suet is just a little cake. Right now, we have out our no melt variety because it's so hot. If you were to put the regular variety, it's going to become a drippy mess and you're not going to like us very much. So we are selling a no melt variety. We do have in the back the regular. So if you want the regular, we can definitely get that for you. But we recommend using the no melt right now. And you just drop that in the feeder, put it out for the birds. Baby birds get all their moisture from their food, so they're not hauling seeds to the baby. They're using things like suet, those bark butter bits I mentioned, things like that is what they're liking to take to the nest. And then you'll notice this little paddle down here. That's what we call a tail prop. Woodpeckers are huge fans of suet. That's their favorite food. So if you want to bring in more woodpeckers, definitely look into getting a suet feeder that has the tail prop on it. They use their tails for balance. So offering a suet feeder like this allows them to use that tail to balance and eat the suet. So something like this. And then we also, again, if your pulse system isn't squirrel proofed, we have a hot pepper variety that again, the squirrels are not a fan of. Okay, and as you go in here, so those, if you're just starting with one feeder, you just walked in the door and said, I'm looking for a feeder. We're going to recommend a hot pepper, or I'm sorry, a hopper feeder or a tube feeder, one of those two feeders. Then as you want to expand on the hobby, we would start to add more feeders. So one of them we would want to add is a peanut feeder as we go down the line. So this is one of my favorite feeders. I refer to this as my woodpecker feeder. And this one, I put peanut splits in it. So it has just some little squares on it. And then you can put peanut splits in it. And I also use one of our seeds called a Tree Nutty Plus, which has a variety of seeds, fruits, and tree nuts in it. The woodpeckers, nuthatches are all over it. Opens at the bottom, so nice and easy to clean. And the way I the way I use this one is, oops, let me get back. I jumped ahead here. I'm jumping all over the place here. Okay, I add that tray we talked about. I mentioned that those birds with the short, thick neck aren't able to eat from the perches. This feeder without a tray on it is designed specifically for clinging birds. So by adding a tray to it, it lets birds like our cardinals and bluebirds who are huge nut lovers and fruit lovers, it lets them also eat from this feeder. So I add a tray to mine as well. And then of course that weather guard, you're not going to catch any of the feeders in my yard without weather guards on them. I always add the weather guards to them. Uh, but I also, now that if you're having a lot of problems with blackbirds right now, you may want to skip the tray. Do I have the tray on mine even with the blackbirds? Yes. Um, but adding that tray does let those cardinals and bluebirds eat because cardinals cannot cling at all. Bluebirds struggle to cling on this one. And again, that seed that I said I use in there is Tree Nutty Plus, but it can be used for bark butter bits and it can also be used for peanut splits. Peanut splits is what it's designed for. And then the one that gets a lot of people into feeding the birds is our hummingbird feeder. This is my preferred style, which is the little saucer style. I know a lot of people use the bottle where the openings are down here. Because of gravity, a lot of times those can be a struggle because they tend to drip on you. So with this style, you won't have those dripping. It opens here to fill. So just pull this off here out of my way. So you would fill it there in the little bowl. And then in the middle of this has a little opening. That's your ant moat. You'll fill that with ant. If you have a style that doesn't have an ant moat, we do have little separate ant moats that you can hang above to fill with water to keep them if you're having problems with with ants getting into your hummingbird feeders. And then you pop the top on. With this being clear, you'll be able to watch when you see your nectar turning cloudy. It's time to change that nectar. But otherwise, with the heat we've been having, you want to change that nectar every 3 days or so. We do have an additive that can be added to your hummingbird nectar. This has a little micronutrient that the hummingbirds get naturally, so it is safe for them. But this will help to extend the life expectancy of your nectar. So this can be added. This is Nectar Defender. You can add that to your hummingbird nectar, and that will help. So you can expect to get closer to the 5 to 6 days without. As quick as my hummingbirds are eating, that's not a problem right now. I'm having to refill before I'm having to change, but do keep an eye on that. You do not want any nasty nectar out there. There's also concentrates you can get out there. that have the nectar defender already added to it. With this, you just add water to it. But most important is make sure you're changing that nectar out when it's starting to get cloudy. The rule of thumb is with hummingbird nectar, if you wouldn't drink it, don't feed it to them. So that's our feeder options. More foods, bring more birds, bring more joy. So some of the different foods that you want to think about offering would be the seeds, which most people think about seed when they're feeding the birds. But you can expand the birds that you're bringing in by adding things like mealworms, which you can do with just basic dried mealworms. You can also add in live mealworms. So those you would use little cup type feeders to bring in live mealworms. This is our version of our Bluebird Bugberry blend. This has mealworms mixed in with all the things that bluebirds love. That's one other way to add mealworms in. The nectar we talked about. Suet, you can do that through the basic suet squares, but we also have the bark butter bits, those little nuggets that I talked about. If you haven't tried it yet, a really cool way is also bark butter. This you can slather right on a tree. You use a fork and spread it right onto a tree. This particular one I have in my hand is a hot pepper variety, but that's a way to get birds coming right up. We've got one tree right outside our bedroom window, and we put it on that tree. And so in the morning, as I'm getting ready, I get to see all sorts of birds out there. And that one, I get to see birds who don't typically come to the feeder. So that one's always cool to watch. The peanuts we talked about out of the shell, but we also offer peanuts in the shell, which is a favorite of our blue jays and our tufted titmice. Of course, our blue, sorry, we have a clock that chimes on the hour here, and that always throws me off when I'm in the store, and it sounds like a bird when it does that. So it always catches me off guard when it does that. It's really spooky when you're in here alone and it does that. So yeah, peanuts are another way. So that when you start offering these specialty foods, you start bringing in more birds. And you can even target if there's a specific, so say you walked in the door and you said, I really want to bring in bluebirds. We're going to point you toward feeders that are blue and then foods like bluebird bugberry blend. So there really is ways to bring in specific birds. And then fruit, adding fruit in is another way, whether it be fruit mixed in with your food. We have jelly, grape jelly that can be put in little cups to bring in some of those fruit-loving birds. And I know we all want to see the Baltimore Oriole since it's our state bird, but very few of us get fortunate enough to see them, mostly when they're migrating through, uh, but occasionally they do. We do catch sightings of them, so don't give up. All right. And then just a little note, all bird seed is not created equal. So when you go out looking for bird seed, on the left, this is black oil. This is what most of our grandparents fed. And then we often hear, well, I just feed that. That's what my grandmother fed, and it worked fine. And it absolutely will feed. If you're only going to feed one type of bird seed, that's what I would tell you to feed. And then we get customers that come in and say, well, I feed black oil and the bluebirds always go to my neighbor's feeder, but they won't come to mine. Well, that's why they go to your neighbor's feeder and not yours, because they're not able to crack that shell. Or if you tell me, I keep finding these shells in my bird bath, well, that may be why, because some of those birds are dropping those in your bird bath, trying to soften that shell so they can crack it. Red-winged blackbirds are one that are famous for doing that to try to crack, to get them to soften up so they can open it and eat them. So your best bet, if you're able, is to offer a blend that has a mix of seeds in there to bring in a bigger variety. And then seed blends. So just offering those blends are going to bring you more birds. You can, if you want, use one feeder that just has black oil if you would like. But if you offer something that has a blend, you will get more birds. Down at the bottom left here, lost my mouse here. This is safflower. This right now can be a problem-solving seed. I know a lot of you are probably very frustrated with those blackbirds at your feeders. So if you have a feeder that you don't want the blackbirds eating from, you can put safflower in it. It's a very hard shell, and those blackbirds are not able to crack it. So that would be one feeder that they're not able to crack. The plus is that the cardinals absolutely love safflower, so they'll be very happy with you for giving them that food. But keep in mind when you add that one, that birds like our goldfinch are also not able to crack that shell. So if you do switch out to safflower, that's where you want to make sure that you have a finch feeder so that your goldfinch still have something to eat. With that said, your house finch do love safflower and they can crack it. So they'll be fine with that safflower. And then down here in the bottom is what we call, oops, get my head again. This is our no mess blend. This is actually my favorite blend. What no mess means are the shells are already taken off the seed. So you're not going to have that buildup under your feeder of all those shells. Everybody can eat no mess blend. You don't have that mess of shells that's going to bring in those little critters underneath the feeders. It's just a cleaner way to feed. When you buy a bag of seed, say you buy a 20-pound bag of this black oil up here and a 20-pound bag of this no mess, you are getting almost twice as much edible food in this no mess as you are in this black oil because you are not paying for all those shells that are just going to end up making a mess underneath your feeders. So when you're trying to compare prices when you're out there shopping for birdseed, keep that in mind that on those ones with shells, you're paying for those shells. So try to compare pound for pound of what those shells are costing you. And then last, on the right-hand side, you want to look. So all of this on this side of the feeder, this here is all filler seed. So those little brown round balls that you see in a bag of seed, if you go out and look at a bag of seed and you see these brown round balls, do not buy that bag of seed. Those are all filler seed. The birds are going to grab those and toss those out of your feeders. That is not just your birds being picky. The birds know that is not edible seed. They're going to throw that down. That's going to grow you a nice little patch of weeds. I always tell our customers, our new customers when they come in, when you switch to our bird seed, you will have to start buying your own grass seed because ours is not going to grow you those patches of weeds down there. This up here is what we call millet, those little yellow balls. That is millet. that is an edible seed. So you can have some of that in your seed when you're shopping for seed. You just don't want to have a lot of that in your seed. So you will see we do have two types of seed here in the store that have some of that in it. It'll say on the bag LM, low millet, because we do have some birds that like some of that. We don't want a lot of that in there because that's also going to attract some of those birds we don't really want a lot of at the feeders, like those house sparrows that tend to kill the bluebirds. I refer to them as parking lot birds. It's the ones you see flying around in Lowe's and Walmart and out in the parking lots and that. So we don't want too much of it. We'll put a little bit in there for those birds that feed on the ground and like it, but not too much. So when you're shopping for that bag of seed, you're going to be looking more for things that have sunflower chips in it. Look for things that have nuts in it, peanuts, tree nuts, some black oil, but stay away from these things that have nothing with brown round balls. A little bit of the white round balls, the millet, will be okay. And I will, if you shop in here, all of ours are blended for our top 25 backyard birds in Southern Maryland. So you have nothing to worry about in our stores. Ours are all blended for our birds here. This, those pieces of advice are if you're not from around here or you're shopping somewhere else. All right. And then baffling, when you're setting up that pole system, you really need to, right off the bat, think how you're going to keep the critters away because we do live in Southern Maryland and we do have critters. This one here on the left is in my backyard. As you can see, it's the middle of the day. And nope, she does not have rabies. She doesn't have any other disease. She's just a mama that's desperate to feed her young. So this time of year, when moms need to feed their young, they will come out during the day. So unless they're acting sick, there's nothing to be concerned with. But you do need to set up your pole systems to baffle them against raccoons. When we first set up our pole system, we set ours up with squirrel baffles. A few years later, all 11 of our pole systems were switched to raccoon baffles. In fact, I just had this conversation with a neighbor today that was buying a pole system and was like, oh, wait, we need to put you in a raccoon baffle because she's a neighbor and she has the same raccoons I have. Um, so they're cute as can be, but it's not so cute when they're destroying your feeders and that. And I don't mind if they eat. We have a wildlife blend that I do put out in a low bird bath to allow everybody else to eat. I just don't want them destroying the feeders. So there's food out there for them, but I don't want them destroying feeders. So right off the bat, when you're choosing where your pole system's going to be, let's think about how we're going to squirrel proof it or raccoon proof it. We often hear people say, oh, I don't have raccoons. I've never seen them. We usually do not see them because they're nocturnal until we do see them. And then the problem with raccoons is when you get a mama like this, they usually have several young with them and they keep them with them an entire year. So if we had not shut her down from the feeders, as soon as those babies were ready to leave, she would have been bringing all three of those, which later she did bring them to feed under the feeders. So that's how I know there were three. She brought all three of them to feed under the feeders, and all three of them would be up at the pole systems eating. So when you're picking that location, you want a pole system that is high enough that when you put that pole up, that you can put a baffle on it. So the key to squirrel, you can squirrel proof it. Like I said, I have 11 pole systems. We are back in the woods. These pole systems have to be high enough that the top of that baffle is 4.5 to 5 feet tall. When I step back here by this, I am 5 feet 4. So you can see where the top of this baffle comes on me. And then all of my feeders are hanging just at the top, just above the top of that baffle. So that's the key is the squirrels have to not be able to climb up the pole or the raccoons. And then we need to plant that pole system where we have 10 foot of clearance all around it. A squirrel's horizontal jump is 10 feet. So you want that pole system 10 feet from deck rails, trees, anything they can jump from. And then that pole system has to be high enough that the top of that baffle is going to be 4.5 to 5 feet high. The problem with a lot of the pole systems out there is they're not tall enough that you can get the height you need to put the baffle where it needs to be. And you're probably thinking, well, if it's that high, I'm not going to be able to reach my feeders. But like I said, I'm 5 feet 4 and I can still reach these feeders. If you remember, you only need to reach to the bottom of the feeders. You don't have to reach the top of them to get those down. So you truly can squirrel proof them. You just have to make sure the pole system is high enough. And then blackbirds, the safflower we mentioned, and then we also have cages that can go on some feeders. Blackbirds are a little bit different. So, and when we talk blackbirds, we're talking a category, red-winged blackbirds, cowbirds, starlings, and I'm missing somebody. Cowbirds, red-winged blackbirds, starlings,
Grackles.
grackles. Thank you. I'm like, there's four. So it's kind of like when we talk juices, it's cranberry, apple juice, grape juice, there's this category. So when we say blackbirds, there's a group of them. Blackbirds are a little bit trickier. If you're having problems with blackbirds, the easiest way, take a picture of your feeders you already have and bring your pictures in to see us. And then creating a bird feeding habitat. So you first start feeding the birds. Along with that, you then start to add shelter. Actually, before you add the shelter, water is most important along with that food. So I really should switch up that order. As soon as you add that food, you also want to add water. Water is way important. Even if it's just adding some type of little dish out there to offer water, you'll actually see squirrel, deer, bees, butterflies, everybody coming to the water. So even if you're not feeding the birds right now, I would recommend to everybody consider putting a little dish out there for the wildlife and birds. So, but to complete your whole habitat, food, shelter, water is what you need. And it's amazing when you start seeing it all come together. And then we have a blueprint for creating the perfect bird feeding habitat. So as I mentioned, if you walk in and said, I just want a bird feeder, we're going to recommend a foundational feeder. A foundational feeder is that one feeder that's going to hold enough food to last you a week. So it's going to be a bigger capacity, hopper style, tube feeder, whatever your preference is. It just needs to be a little bit bigger. Not a tray feeder, not a little cup feeder, something a little bigger. And then as you go on, you're going to start shooting for adding all of these things for the 12 elements. So we have these in store. It's just a little hobby guide. It's free. Just walk in one of our stores in Lexington Park. We're in the plaza with Kohl's, Buffalo Wild Wings, Dick's Sporting Goods. In La Plata, we are next. We're right between Target and Famous Footwear. And just walk into either store and ask if you can get a copy of our hobby guide, and we'll give that to you. But it will give you those 12 elements, and it'll just kind of give you a little outline. But then it also gives you some ideas for suggestions for foundational feeders. And then you can take that and use kind of like the old Sears catalogs to dream and a wish list in that to help you as you go through planning your backyard habitat. So again, that's called the hobby guide. So then I'm gonna take this off screen share, and then we will go into questions. And like I said, it doesn't have to necessarily be about the presentation today. Christine, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, there are no questions in chat. If anybody does have one, you can type it in there, but we can also, um, you can just unmute yourself and ask a question. I had a couple. You were talking about the summer tanagers,
Yeah,
and you said that people have been seeing those around the
yeah.
county. Where in particular?
So I've got two pairs in my backyard. So they are nesting right now. So I've got them in my backyard. Several team members have them in their yard. My grandson was telling me driving to Abel's Wharf, which is in Leonardtown yesterday, he saw one on the power line. So they're just
Oh,
very visible because they are nesting right now. So
okay.
there's just, and if you all remember last fall, anybody that's been feeding for a while, everybody was like, where are my birds? Where are my birds? Where are my birds? Because we were having that mass year. So nesting is really good for the birds right now. You know, it was a good year. They had plenty to eat. So they seem to be overperforming as far as nesting right now.
Oh, okay. I'll keep my eyes out then. Okay.
Yeah, I would just,
So,
and
oh,
again, that Merlin app we talked about, use that to help you find them by sound and then start watching.
mhm. Yep. Jenny asked, do blackbirds eat the hot suet and cylinders, or do they not like it?
Yeah, so birds don't have a sense of taste. Well, I shouldn't say that. Vultures do have a little bit of sense of taste, but our songbirds that are coming to the feeders do not have a sense of taste. So that hot pepper is only going to work on the mammals. So for blackbirds, you can use the safflower to try to keep them away. And then you can also, we have cages that have 1.5 inch openings. If it's our feeders, some of those can be caged to try to keep the blackbirds away. But no, hot pepper is only going to prevent mammals, things with wet mouths.
Oh, okay. When you were talking about the hummingbirds and you talked about the nectar defender,
Uh-huh.
does that have a shelf life? Because I still have some from last year. Like, can I still use last year's?
Good question. I do not see one on here. I think you should be fine with that.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as it was just last year.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you all for spending the time with us tonight, and thank you as always, Barb. It's great to learn more, and it's nice to get the refresher because I had forgotten a few of the points that you were mentioning. So,
Awesome.
so yeah, so that was helpful. Okay, well, thank you everybody, and hope to see you next time.